If Active Directory was built for offices that no longer exist, what's replacing it today? Microsoft Entra is positioning itself not just as another IAM tool, but as the framework for securing identities in a hybrid, perimeter-less world. The challenge is this: most IT admins are still juggling legacy systems with cloud-first demands. So how does Entra bridge that gap without breaking what already works? That's the exact question we'll unpack, because the answer could change the way you think about identity management going forward. From office halls to hybrid clouds, why does a tool designed in the 90s still define so many IT environments today? The answer lies in how deeply woven Active Directory became into office life. If you walked into a corporate office 20 years ago, the first thing a new employee received wasn't cloud credentials or federated identities, it was an account in Active Directory. That single sign-on handled access to email, files, printers, databases, and even the door badge system in some cases. It wasn't flashy, it didn't need to be. AD sat in the background, quietly running user authentication and group policies that kept everything consistent across the network. For most IT teams, it was the closest thing to a control center. The challenge is that Active Directory was built in an era when everything lived safely inside the four walls of a business. Servers stayed on racks in the basement. Applications were installed on desktops that never left the office. The firewall was the guardrail, keeping bad actors out, while employees used a domain-joined PC to work inside. That architecture fit the workplace of that era perfectly. But the world no longer looks like that. Today's network isn't a single building. It's a patchwork of home offices, SaaS platforms, and mobile devices constantly moving between personal and professional use. That makes the old perimeter model feel like trying to secure a castle wall when everyone's already scattered across the countryside. We've all seen how employees adapt when the technology doesn't keep up. VPNs are a perfect example. They were supposed to be the extension of the office network into someone's home. But in practice, the slowdowns and connection drops made people look for workarounds. Instead of waiting for a VPN tunnel to spin up, users started saving files to personal OneDrive accounts or emailing data to themselves just to get work done. That's how shadow IT grew, not because workers wanted to break policy, but because they couldn't wait for clunky systems when projects moved faster than the tools designed to support them. IT departments often discovered these shortcuts long after they were in place, and by then, sensitive data had already left secure environments. The bigger shift is realizing that security no longer revolves around servers or the office network. The real frontline today is identity. Attackers don't bang against firewalls so much as they try to guess passwords, fish for multi-factor codes, or trick employees into authorizing access. Once they gain account credentials, the rest is almost effortless. That's why breaches linked to stolen identities have become so widespread. An attacker no longer needs to hack into a server if they can log in as a valid user. From there, they move laterally, access sensitive data, or escalate privileges, all under the radar of traditional defenses. The urgency becomes clearer when you look at how many headlines point back to compromised accounts. Whether it's ransomware spreading through an employee login or sensitive records exposed because of an unused but still active account, the entry point is rarely a broken server vulnerability anymore. Instead, it's the person and the system that verifies who they are. This explains why security conversations shifted from protecting networks to protecting identities. The identity is the true perimeter because it's the one constant across cloud platforms, endpoints, and applications. If credentials are strong and access is verified continuously, an organization stays resilient even as its footprint changes daily. But here's where the story gets interesting. If AD worked so well for the old world, what carried organizations through the early stages of this transformation? We saw patchwork approaches, federated identity systems bolted onto existing AD, third-party single sign-on providers, and custom sync tools that tried to unify passwords across applications. These filled the gap, but they were never built for scale or for the cloud-native model now driving IT. They kept businesses running, but they also created silos and complexity that only grew over time. Admins found themselves managing sprawling configurations with constant sync errors, leaving gaps in visibility and control. This is why the evolution of IAM doesn't stop at extending AD outward. Hybrid solutions bought time, but they also made it clear a different approach was needed. IT leaders began to see identity not as an add-on, but as the foundation of security itself. That realization set the stage for new platforms shaped around mobility, multi-cloud, and regulatory demands. And that's where Microsoft Entra comes into the picture. It's positioned not simply as Active Directory brought into the cloud, but as a different model entirely, one designed for the reality of boundary-less work, where trust is no longer implied by being connected to the network, but must be proven at every step. The rise of identity as the perimeter. How do you protect an organization that no longer has walls? That's the reality most IT teams face right now. The local office might still be there, but the workforce isn't tied to it anymore. Employees are logging in from homes, airports, client sites, and co-working spaces. And they're not just connecting to a single corporate network. Their workday probably spans multiple SaaS platforms like Salesforce, Slack, and ServiceNow, while still needing access to old on-prem databases and line-of-business applications that never made the jump to the cloud. That mix creates an environment where the definition of a network perimeter starts to blur until it's basically meaningless. Think about a hospital running an electronic health record system that sits in its own data center, but at the same time doctors need secure access to cloud imaging software or collaboration tools for research projects. Or a bank that has decades of core systems bound tightly to AD, while customer engagement platforms lie fully in the cloud. In both cases, IT isn't managing a single closed environment anymore. It's juggling multiple sources of identity and access. The result is a fragmented security posture where credentials and permissions live in different silos, making it much harder to track who has access to what. Trying to secure this setup is like being handed keys to dozens of buildings and finding that every building has several doors left unlocked. You can lock down one, but the others create openings that attackers are quick to notice. Each SaaS app introduces its own authentication method, policies, and user management. Legacy systems often don't speak the same language or require elaborate connectors just to sync. The complexity alone becomes a risk because it increases the chance of missed permissions, outdated accounts, or security policies that don't apply universally. Then layer compliance requirements on top of this picture. If you're in financial services, regulators expect strict oversight of who can view sensitive account data and under what conditions. Auditors want detailed logs showing when a permissions change happened, who approved it, and when the access expires. Healthcare organizations face similar obligations, except the data is even more personal: patient history, treatments, insurance records. One oversight here isn't just a technical mistake. It's a compliance violation that carries legal and financial penalties. Across industries, the inability to maintain consistent identity controls across every system isn't just operationally messy, it creates measurable business risk. What makes it harder is the duplication of rights. In a financial firm, an employee might receive access to internal trading apps during one project, then gain overlapping permissions to a CRM system through another role. When no one circles back to audit those layers, the employee ends up with overlapping access that goes far beyond what they need in the present. Healthcare has a parallel problem. Doctors and nurses rotate departments, take temporary shifts, or work across clinics. Their access rights often stack up with every new role assignment. Without visibility, IT doesn't always know when permissions stop being relevant, creating a huge surface for insider misuse or external exploitation. The industry's response has been a philosophical shift away from network-based trust. It's called zero trust. Instead of assuming someone is safe because they're inside the corporate network or logged in from a company laptop, zero trust starts with nothing. Every login, every request for access is treated as untrusted until verified. Conditions like device health, geolocation, and even behavioral patterns weigh in on whether a user should gain entry. The advantage is that it closes the gap attackers once used, slipping in through a privileged account or a VPN session that isn't monitored closely enough. But here's the challenge. Legacy IAM tools weren't designed for that model. They enforced flat rules. If you're on the domain and have valid credentials, you're in. They don't know how to check for device status, risk exposure, or contextual data in real time. And that's where modern tools need to step up. Identity has become the anchor point in this new strategy. It's not about where the user connects from anymore. It's about verifying the identity continuously across every hop, every application, every set of credentials. That shift has already happened. Identity is the new perimeter, not the firewall, not the VPN, but the entity of the user itself. Every access request is now an opportunity to validate, trust, and apply least privilege. This doesn't just align with zero trust, it's the technical foundation that makes it practical, which is why solutions like Microsoft Entra exist. They're not designed as add-ons to patch old problems, but as platforms built specifically for an identity-first world where access can't rely on walls that no longer exist. And this is where we start to see how Entra directly supports the move to identity as the real security boundary. Why Entra isn't just Active Directory 2.0? Is Entra just a cloud refresh of Active Directory? Not even close. That assumption floats around a lot, especially from folks who've managed Azure AD for years and now see it suddenly labeled under the Entra brand. It's easy to think Microsoft just slapped on a new name, but that undersells what's actually going on. Entra isn't one product, it's a suite. And more importantly, it's a signal that identity management itself had to be rethought for the environments businesses run today. The misconception comes from the fact that Azure AD was the foundation for so long. It gave organizations single sign-on to Microsoft 365 and other SaaS apps, and then expanded into features like conditional access and identity protections. So when people hear Entra, many assume it's just Azure AD with some polish. But that view misses the bigger picture. Entra is designed to operate across platforms, clouds, and even to handle scenarios where identities aren't limited to employees logging into productivity apps. It's addressing challenges AD and Azure AD alone were never meant to handle. What makes Entra stand out is that it brings multiple components together. You still have Entra ID, which is the continuation of Azure AD. It manages authentication, authorization, conditional access, and user lifecycle. Then you have Entra Permissions Management, which deals with something AD was never built to tackle, least privilege across multi-cloud environments. Instead of admins bouncing between AWS IAM, Azure RBAC, and Google Cloud IAM, Permissions Management centralizes visibility and control. You can set policies and monitor who has rights to resources, no matter which cloud they sit on. And then there's Entra Verified ID, which is all about decentralized verifiable credentials. Think of it as giving users portable, cryptographically secure identity proofs that organizations can trust without maintaining giant centralized databases. All three pieces together represent a shift way beyond a rebrand. To see how different this really is, imagine a company running workloads split across AWS for development, Azure for productivity, and GCP for analytics. Each platform has its own identity and permission model. Without a unifying layer, admins end up juggling 3 consoles, 3 sets of policies, and constant spreadsheets to track what permissions overlap. With Entra, access to those environments can be managed from a single place. Permissions management lets you see when an engineer has admin rights in AWS that conflict with restricted roles in Azure, and you can enforce least privilege automatically. That level of oversight simply isn't possible with each cloud's native tools working in isolation. Beyond unifying platforms, Entra is built to adapt in ways AD never could. Traditional IAM is rules-based. If a user meets the defined conditions, access is granted. The problem is that static rules don't account for context. Entra takes a different path with adaptive access. Instead of every login being judged against a flat checklist, the system uses signals, device health, geolocation, time of day, even anomalies in user behavior. If someone signs in from a managed laptop in the same region they always use, access is straightforward. But if that same user suddenly tries to log in from an unrecognized device in another country, Entra can require additional verification or block the request entirely. That kind of dynamic, real-time decision-making keeps the friction low for valid users while raising the bar for attackers. What gives this teeth is machine learning tied into Microsoft's massive signal network. Because Entra processes billions of authentications daily across global services, it learns patterns at a scale individual organizations never could on their own. If a new style of credential stuffing attack starts appearing in one region, Entra can inform conditional access policies everywhere, almost in real time. Compare that to AD, where any adjustments had to be defined manually by admins and rolled out across group policies. It's the difference between reactive defenses and a platform that evolves as the threat landscape shifts. That's why it's a mistake to see Entra as just Azure AD in disguise. It's not a rename, it's an entire architecture shift. Where AD was built for single environments with clear perimeters, Entra is designed for multi-cloud, multi-device, hybrid workplaces where the only consistent factor is identity. It weaves together permissions, verification, and adaptive controls into one framework, preparing organizations to face threats that don't play by static rules anymore. And if access is now adaptive and smarter than ever, the next unsolved challenge is governance. How to prevent permissions from piling up silently in the background. That's where the conversation naturally heads next. Fixing access creep with governance. When was the last time you audited who has access to what in your company? For most teams, those reviews don't happen nearly as often as they should. The problem has a name, access creep. It happens slowly, sometimes without anyone noticing. A user moves from one department to another, takes on a temporary project, or covers for a manager on leave. Each time, new permissions get added. But rarely does anyone go back to clean up the old ones. Months later, that same user still carries access to applications, files, or systems that have nothing to do with their current role. Multiply that by hundreds or even thousands of employees, and you end up with an environment where permissions sprawl far beyond what's really needed. The risks here are more than just messy Active Directory groups or confusing audit trails. Dormant permissions are security liabilities. They create openings for insider threats, disgruntled employees, intentional misuse, or even accidental data exposure. Just as worrying, they leave organizations wide open to compliance failures. During an audit, those unused or excessive privileges show up quickly, and explaining why a marketing analyst still has access to payroll data can't be brushed aside as a simple oversight. Access that lingers without purpose increases the likeliness of both mistakes and violations, and regulators rarely see good intentions as an acceptable defense. Think about contractors. Many businesses rely heavily on third parties for short-term projects, consultants for reporting, developers for app builds, agencies for creative work. These contractors often get access to SharePoint libraries, Teams channels, or even reporting tools like Power BI. The project wraps up, but their credentials never really go away. It's not unusual to find accounts for people who stopped working months ago still able to read sensitive documents or run reports. In large environments, that forgotten access might sit there for years. It's shadow risk, hidden enough that it doesn't impair daily business, but dangerous enough to cause real problems when discovered by the wrong person. This is where Entra's identity governance comes into play. Instead of relying on humans to track and manage every change, it automates lifecycle workflows. When a new hire joins, their access is provisioned systematically according to role. When they change jobs, the old rights phase out and new ones come in. When they leave, access is removed immediately. This automated gating prevents the slow buildup that turns into access creep. At the same time, entitlement management provides structured access packages. Instead of one-off ad hoc approvals, you can define collections of permissions tied to business roles or specific projects. Users request access to the package rather than piecing together individual applications one request at a time. The difference sounds simple, but it solves a major gap. Permissions get added deliberately, not by accident. Access reviews extend the coverage even further. These reviews give managers regular prompts to verify whether their team members still need the permissions they hold. Instead of running annual audits where half the data is outdated, governance tools build a recurring cycle of checks. When someone's rights are no longer justified, the manager can revoke them in one step. This ongoing correction process keeps access aligned with actual business needs in real time. Separation of duties policies take it a step deeper. Picture a finance employee who has both rights to approve wire transfers and the ability to set up new vendors. That pairing of permissions is dangerous because it invites fraud. Governance policies in Entra can flag that combination before it becomes active, giving admins a chance to redesign or limit access before it turns into an auditor's nightmare. Instead of stumbling across conflicts months after they're abused, the system catches them early. An overlooked benefit is how governance covers non-employees. Partners, suppliers, and temporary staff need access too, but each carries the same risks as an internal user. Identity governance applies the same controls across that extended workforce. Their entitlements expire automatically when no longer needed, so you don't end up with abandoned accounts tied to people who no longer have any relationship with the business. This universality is key. Governance isn't just for full-time staff, it's a framework that ensures anyone with access is accounted for. The real shift here is mindset. Most organizations react to access problems when they stumble across them. Being proactive flips that entirely. With proactive workflows, entitlement policies, and access reviews woven into daily operations, permissions stop accumulating in the shadows. Instead of dreading compliance checks, companies know exactly where they stand before auditors even ask. That confidence translates to smoother audits, lower risk, and stronger day-to-day security. So governance in Entra isn't busy work, it's preventative security with compliance baked in. By closing the loop on access creep, it protects against both human error and overlooked accounts, while ensuring every user's rights map directly to their role. In practice, that means environments stay clean, organizations stay audit ready, and permissions stop ballooning quietly in the background. Which brings us to the next question. How do you prepare an identity system for threats that don't even exist yet? That's where Entra's adaptability shows its full value. Adapting for a threat landscape that hasn't happened yet. What if your IAM system could detect threats you don't even know exist yet? That's the real shift happening in identity security, and it's where Microsoft Entra takes on a role older tools simply can't match. The reality is attackers don't sit still. They constantly test new approaches, new credential attacks, and new ways of slipping under static defenses. If your system only responds to rules you already set, you're always a step behind. That's the limitation with legacy IAM. Static conditions that don't evolve unless an admin goes in and rewrites them manually. Think about how typical IAM rules work. You set a policy. If the user is on a corporate laptop, in a known IP range, and enters the correct password, they're granted access. Sounds fine until it's not. Policies like these don't change on their own. If attackers discover a new method, say they start targeting employees with MFA fatigue attacks, your system has no way of recognizing that unless you update it after the fact. By the time someone notices the pattern, the damage can already be done. That lag is exactly what modern attackers exploit. They aren't actually breaking into systems, they're walking through the front door using valid but compromised credentials. Entra takes a totally different angle with AI-driven risk detection. Instead of fixed rules, it looks at signals in real time and adapts. The system doesn't just check whether a password is correct, it asks context-driven questions. Is this login consistent with the user's recent activity? Is the device patched and compliant? Has the account been behaving normally during the past week? The answers are processed not by a static checklist, but by machine learning models tuned to spot anomalies even when they don't fit into a neat definition. That means Entra can raise red flags long before IT staff even notice there's something strange going on. Take the example of impossible travel. A user logs in from Chicago at 9 a.m., then shows up authenticating from Tokyo 15 minutes later. No human being can travel that fast, which means something is wrong. Legacy IAM wouldn't necessarily catch that event, especially if both logins look valid on the surface. Entra recognizes the pattern as impossible and rates it a risky sign-in, which can trigger multi-factor re-authentication on the spot or block the attempt altogether. Password spray attempts fall into the same category. A low-level flood of logins, each trying a single password across many accounts, can blend into daily noise. Entra's anomaly detection is tuned to see that pattern as abnormal, flag it, and shut it down before attackers scale up. These aren't guesses pulled out of thin air. The reason Entra can do this reliably is because of the telemetry it draws from Microsoft's massive footprint. Billions of authentications flow through their systems every single day. Each login, each conditional access check, each failed and successful attempt adds to a global pool of intelligence. The benefit trickles down because your tenant inherits that collective learning. So if attackers test a new tactic against one set of organizations today, Entra is already refining detection models that help protect everyone else tomorrow. It's global learning applied to local defense. Compare that to how a team with only static policies would respond. You'd probably hear about the threat after it's already spreading online, scramble to write a rule to cover it, and hope you're fast enough to deploy it everywhere before an incident happens internally. That reactive approach doesn't scale against an adversary who thrives on speed and novelty. Entra's advantage is that you don't have to wait for known patterns to hit. The system is scanning for deviations constantly, adapting as new forms of credential abuse surface. What this all boils down to is adaptability. Identity threats evolve faster than most teams can rewrite policy. By building AI into the detection layer, Entra positions organizations to stay secure not just against the attacks we already understand, but against those about to appear. It's like upgrading from alarms that go off only when someone opens the door to a monitoring system that notices suspicious behavior before they even reach it. Threats that haven't been named yet are still on the radar. And when you see security that works this way, the bigger picture starts to click. Future-proof IAM isn't about adding more static rules. It's about designing systems that continue to learn, anticipate, and respond even as the threat landscape shifts underneath. That's the approach Entra leans into, making identity not just a perimeter but a living, responsive defense layer. Entra isn't about ripping out everything built on Active Directory or bolting new tools onto old frameworks. It's about shifting the mindset from static security to anticipating where identity threats are heading next. Instead of asking, does this person have access today? The question becomes, should they still, and is this request trustworthy in context? That's why IAM can't be treated as a one-time deployment. It's ongoing strategy, just like patching or endpoint management. The future may be perimeterless, but your security doesn't have to be. With Entra, identity becomes the defense that grows alongside the threat landscape.